Welcome to the Equity Conscious Leader, a new generation equity podcast and YouTube channel where we chat with leaders about tangible system change and strategies to advance and sustain equity work in their organizations. Our conversations dive deep into the 6 dimensions of equity conscious leadership. So how do you lead with transformational system change for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Let's find out on this episode of the Equity Conscious Leader with your host and educational equity leader, Dr. Jag Lathan.
Hello, Dr. Fabiola Bagula. Welcome.
Good morning. It's good to see you.
We are so excited to have you on NGE's podcast. And I know that we're going to learn a wealth from you around teaming and collaboration. Please share with us your current role.
I am currently 1 year in as the Deputy Superintendent for San Diego Unified School District.
Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you end up in the place where you are in education?
I fell in love with school as a little girl. It was a safe space for me to be in. I absolutely loved my teachers and they saw something about me. And I always felt cared for. But I also knew that I was receiving different treatment than my sister and also my cousins who all went to the same school system. So I recognized the difference there even back then. But I really did. I fell in love with school. I fell in love with teachers. I learned how to do school very quickly um, and was able to fulfill the promise of I want to be the first person to go to college and what that meant. But it was also a piece of reckoning the difference of being a first generation immigrant and trying to reconcile what it meant to be a Latina or a Chicana in America, trying to go to school. And what I mean by that, and Dr. Jag, I know you know this story, is I was a really good student. I knew how to do really well. I learned, straight A's, all of those things. And but traditionally, Latinas are not supposed to leave home if they're not married. And so, even though my mom was always like, "You're going to go to college, you're going to have a career, you're going to live a different life than me," once it actually came to the decision of you need to leave home and go to your studies, it was like, no, 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 you're not married, you can't go. Why can't you go to one of the colleges here? And it had to be my high school principal took a liking to me. We had a very close relationship. So he actually went to my house to talk to my mom about allowing me to leave home to go to college. So there was a compromise that was made that it would still be in the same city, but I would live on campus. So that really kind of has driven a lot of the work that I do with students. That gave me a love and a respect for education, and it is what I learned and what I did. And so I fell in love with the classroom when I was there. I can't believe they gave me keys to a classroom at 21. Um, but I will tell you that I just thought I was going to be a teacher. That's what I set out to do. That's what I understood about careers, and I've been tapped all the time to apply to certain positions. So someone along my career would say, "Wow, you're a great teacher. I think you should consider being a teacher's coach." And it hadn't, crossed my mind. And then when I pursued it, I did that for a few years. And then someone would tap me and say, "You're a really great teacher's coach. You'd be a great principal. Maybe you should do that." And I would say, "Oh, yeah, maybe. Like, let's think about that." So it's always been like, for me, I've been lucky that I've been tapped, but I also now, from a equity lens and from a diversity lens, I understand that level of sponsorship and mentorship of being able to see a gift in someone else and naming it and then helping them get there. And I feel like that's our work in general of how many brilliant Latina women I now have met and have said, "You need to go get your doctorate. You're really smart. How are you contributing to this fashion?" And so I think about my own journey to deputy superintendent, and I'm going to say it one more time, I was tapped. I did not apply. So I was appointed to this role, and and I actually was a little scared at the beginning, like, oh my gosh, maybe this role is too big for me. This is not, I just wanted to teach fourth grade. Um, but I go back and think, no, this is actually what this is about. It's about seeing people's potential capacity and gifts, naming it for them, and then sponsoring them. And so I'm trying to do that with young women. I'm trying to do that with the young men, Black and brown men that I've seen and met, So that's been a little bit of my journey. I know I went into it a little bit more, but I think that's really important, because I'm trying to give back to all of the gifts that I've received now as an educator.
Thank you, Dr. Bagula. One thing I know about you from just your work in education is your phenomenal ability to bring people together towards a common goal. And in our world, we typically call that teaming, right? And one of the dimensions of our equity conscious leadership framework is around collaboration and teaming, illuminate collective wisdom. And some of that language actually came from you. I've heard you say over the years, like, how do we illuminate our wisdom? How do we illuminate this collective wisdom? So thank you for that. And I would love to hear like what that means for you.
So one of the really like pivotal learning points for me about teaming was actually from a book called The Wisdom of the Crowd. And there was a part in that book that has struck me, and I carry it with me with all of the teamings, which was it was a silly anecdote, but I also believe I learned by stories and storytelling. So when I saw that story, it resonated. Anyway, what these researchers were discussing was they studied those contests like at fairs with where it says, guess how many jelly beans are in this jar, guess how much this pig weighs. Those we've all seen variations of that, whether in person or on TV. And what these researchers studied was that when they averaged the responses of the crowd, they got to the exact answer. And I always thought that that was fascinating. So together, all of our answers, the average of all of our answers is actually the right answer. And so I always kept thinking about like how fascinating is that, especially in education where it's a group of teachers or a group of principals or a group of students. And how often do we actually think about average understanding of the whole instead of an individual answer or individual response. And so I carry that as a notion of together we know the answer and together we know what to do. And so, how do I build the conditions so that together we can actually find the right answers?
Thank you so much. Dr. Bagula, can you share what equity means for you? And then we're going to jump into psychological safety, but I wanted to kind of give a foundation of like the connection between your understanding, beliefs, and leadership around equity, and then also how that connects to psychological safety.
So, I mean, I feel so, and this is where we can potentially argue. I feel like I carry the definition of equity for myself, but then I think like it doesn't actually matter until it hits you in the face. But I digress. Uh, Equity to me means everyone receiving what they need, how they need it, when they need it. And that could mean all sorts of things. It could mean, food. It could mean understanding. It could mean compassion. It could mean love. But the level of understanding and knowing the person or the people in front of you to be able to gauge what they need, when they need it, how they need it is extraordinarily difficult. And so I just think about that as a concept that gets very complicated right away. So that's the definition that I carry, and I know it's been a definition that's out there. I think I first heard it from Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, um, but I've also know that my rebellious streak goes, okay, I'll accept that one as the definition. But I also know that if I carry that definition and don't do anything when issues of equity are hitting me in the face, then I really don't believe in that definition. So you're asking me a complex question, Dr. Jag. As you can see, I've been like existentialist about that
Yeah,
definition.
what
So
I appreciate about that is you're talking about what I'm hearing is the difference between understanding what something means and actually doing it and the hard work that it takes to actually do it. Right. And so, and I know in the education world, we often use similar definitions. And when the rubber hits the road and you actually have to change systems to make that happen, that's the importance of teaming. Right? Yeah. And having systems and structures in place. So that was actually a beautiful transition to psychological safety. I'm going to read a just a short excerpt to you from our framework. It says the term psychological safety was originally coined by Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson. She defines it as a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. So that's part of it. It's longer than that, but that's kind of a short summary of it. Tell me what comes to mind when you think about psychological safety and teaming.
So, I'm a big believer in the four quadrants of psychological safety, and I think they're all really important. And when you read that quote, I actually went to, in my head, I went to a different scholar, a Black scholar, who said something that I carry as well. And it goes with what you said. And she says, you cannot meaningfully agree until you have meaningfully disagreed. And so Amy Edmondson talks about this notion of candor and being able to have the real conversation without any fear. And I always think about like, it's easier. I've been in groups before where it's easy to agree and it's easy even to acquiesce and agree just for the sake of the team or for the sake of moving on or for the sake of time or for the sake of, I haven't been heard, so I'm just going to nod so I can leave this meeting. And what this other scholar, and I want to say it's, oh my gosh, I can't think of her name right now. But what this other scholar says is, yes, and can you actually disagree? Because you can actually agree without having disagreed first. And so I think about psychological safety and I think about the four components, right? According to Edmondson, there's learner, collaborator, challenger, and inclusion safety. And I think I don't have any of those four unless I can actually state when I disagree with something and the level of learning of from a team in order to be able to disagree is not only hard to do, but it needs to be very intentional. But I've seen it work, and the results of that level of candor in psychological safety groups is beautiful and can be transformational to organizations. So I'm listening to you thinking yes and this.